welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we are tracing the absolutely wild and frankly super bloody arc of the French Revolution. We're going to map out exactly how a nation went from an absolute monarchy to a radical republic, and then swung right back to an absolute dictatorship, all in the span of just 10 years. It's a crazy ride, so let's jump right in.
So here's the big question we really need to answer today. How in the world did a quest for fundamental human rights, liberty and equality, spiral into absolute terror and end up with a military dictator calling the shots? To wrap our heads around this, we have to look closely at a massive domino effect of fear, anger, and some seriously staggering inequality.
All right, we begin in the late 18th century. Now, on the outside, France looked like this beautiful, cultured place, but behind the scenes, they were entirely broke. King Louis XVI and the nobility were throwing these lavish, over-the-top parties, while the everyday peasant was literally left holding empty pockets. The entire social system was just fundamentally broken.
And the social math here was a disaster. The first and second estates, which were the clergy and the nobility, they made up just 2% of the population. But the third estate, the peasants and workers, made up a massive 98%. Think about that. That 98% was doing literally all the backbreaking work just to support the wildly luxurious lifestyles of the top 2%. And this inequality, it was aggressively financial. The starving third estate was getting taxed from absolutely every direction. We're talking taxes on income, on salt, even on the number of windows on their houses. Can you imagine? Meanwhile, Queen Marie Antoinette is spending absolute fortunes on towering, elaborate hairstyles, while the elite paid almost nothing. It was completely unsustainable.
Well, the actual breaking point came from abroad. King Louis XVI, mostly just wanting to stick it to the British, decided to finance the American Revolution. And that pushed France right into severe national debt. Combine that with some incredibly harsh winters that completely ruined the peasant harvests, and the cost of bread just skyrockets. So now the poor weren't just heavily taxed, they were starving. And as history tells us, starving people tend to riot.
So the king tries to solve this massive financial crisis by calling a government assembly called the Estates General. But there was a glaring flaw in the plan. Each estate only got one vote. The third estate quickly realized the voting system was entirely rigged to let the top 2% always outvote the 98% by a score of 2-1. They decided they'd absolutely had enough. And just like that, the revolution is officially ignited. When the third estate boldly declared themselves the new National Assembly, the king's response was literally just to lock the doors to their building. So what do? They find an unlocked indoor tennis court down the road. Right there on the court, they take the famous tennis court oath, basically pledging not to leave until they forced economic reform and real equality. But as they're organizing, this terrifying rumor sweeps through Paris that the king's military is gathering to arrest them all.
You know how it goes. Fear boils over into anger, and anger detonates with violence. On July 14th, 1789, the furious Parisian mob decides to arm themselves. They storm the Bastille, which was this towering prison fortress and a huge symbol of royal tyranny, specifically looking for gunpowder. This totally kicks off the violent phase of the revolution, famously marked by the mob parading the prison governor's head on a pike. And the National Assembly, they actually chose not to condemn this violence, which set a pretty dark precedent for what was coming.
Now, what's really fascinating here is that initially, the revolutionaries didn't actually want to kill the king. They just wanted a constitutional monarchy. But Louis completely ruined any remaining trust when he and his family disguised themselves as servants and tried to flee France under the cover of night. He was caught near the border, recognized, and hauled right back to Paris. To the people, he wasn't just a bad king anymore. He was a traitor abandoning his own country.
Look at this staggering pace of change. In just 3 short years, France goes from forming a national assembly to entirely abolishing a centuries-old monarchy after an enraged mob storms the king's palace. By late 1792, the French Republic is officially declared. But unfortunately, those enlightened ideals of democracy we talked about, they quickly gave way to extreme paranoia.
Ironically, one of the ways the revolution tried to enforce equality was actually in capital punishment. Enter the guillotine, or as they called it, the national razor. It was literally designed to ensure all criminals, whether rich or poor, received the exact same quick, painless death. And that brand of equality soon came for the king himself. After being found guilty of treason, Citizen Louis was sentenced to the guillotine by a margin of just one single vote. One vote.
So, with the king dead, foreign armies from Austria and Prussia closing in, and massive counter-revolutions erupting all over the French countryside, pure panic sets in. Radical politicians known as the Jacobins take absolute control. They were led by a highly educated but intensely paranoid lawyer named Maximilien Robespierre. And Robespierre and his allies decide that the only way to save their fragile revolution is through sheer, unadulterated terror. Radical writers immediately fanned these flames of violence. The most famous was Jean-Paul Marat. He was a guy confined to a bathtub due to a terrible skin condition, furiously writing away. In his wildly popular newspaper, he demanded the execution of anyone even slightly suspected of working against the new republic. I mean, he was literally calling for thousands of heads to roll. The public listened, and the bloodbath truly began.
Under the newly formed 12-man Committee of Public Safety, fear actually became official government policy. Just surviving meant navigating this terrifying maze of secret police. If you committed even a minor offense, like, say, complaining about bread prices, using old royal titles, or simply not looking enthusiastic enough about the revolution, your own neighbor could report you. You'd be dragged before the Revolutionary Tribunal and almost inevitably sent straight to the guillotine.
40,000. Let that sink in for a second. That is the staggering number of people killed across France for suspected crimes against liberty. Among them was the former queen, Marie Antoinette, who met the exact same fate as her husband. The Reign of Terror totally consumed the nation, taking the lives of aristocrats, priests, peasants, and anyone unlucky enough to get caught in the crosshairs of a neighborly dispute or political paranoia.
Robespierre was absolutely hell-bent on creating what he called a republic of virtue, which resulted in some of the most extreme social engineering in human history. They didn't just execute moderate politicians, they literally tried to delete the past. They arrested priests, replaced the Catholic Church with an atheistic cult of reason, banned the everyday title Monsieur, and incredibly, they even created a brand new revolutionary calendar. They completely deleted months like December. It was wild.
But ultimately, this huge domino effect of paranoia claimed its own architect. Robespierre truly believed he was saving France, but he completely lost his grip on reality. One day, he shows up to the assembly waving a list of new enemies to be executed, but he completely refuses to actually name who was on the list. Well, the terrified politicians, realizing they could be next, turned on him to save themselves. Robespierre was sent to the guillotine, and just like that, the Reign of Terror finally ended. Following the terror, a more moderate but deeply corrupt and unpopular government called the Directory took over. France was essentially in a state of social anarchy, and the people, they were just completely exhausted. This massive power vacuum paved the way for a brilliant, wildly successful 28-year-old military hero to swoop right in, Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon first gained massive fame by putting down a royalist uprising in Paris. Then he gets sent to Italy, where he almost single-handedly knocks Austria out of the war, using some truly groundbreaking military strategy. By the time he returns to Paris in 1799, he is immensely popular with the public, while the actual government is despised. Napoleon looked at the situation and realized the French people were absolutely desperate for a strong, stable leader. He was actually recruited by a politician named Emmanuel Joseph Sieyès to help stage a government takeover. Sieyès thought, hey, I can use Napoleon as the military muscle and pull the strings. But Napoleon had completely different plans. Once they entered the government chambers, the ambitious general cleverly used his loyal troops to intimidate the council, completely rewrite the constitution, and effectively make himself a dictator. Basically, he couped the coup. And just like that, the 10-year chaotic social experiment was over. Napoleon rapidly stabilized French society. He dissolved the ineffective Directory, rolled back the most extreme cultural changes like, restoring the Catholic Church and tossing out that crazy revolutionary calendar, and really organized the nation. But his ambitions definitely didn't stop at the French borders. He was already dreaming of massive, continent-wide European conquest. So it leaves us with a truly fascinating historical irony, doesn't it? The common people dared to violently dismantle an oppressive monarchy in the name of liberty and equality, only to hand absolute control right back to a single dictator just 10 years later. It really forces us to question the unpredictable and often dangerous nature of rapid social change. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you on the next one.